Captain Aidan Voss stood at the edge of the observation deck, his gaze fixed on the stars beyond. The hum of the starship Vanguard echoed faintly around him, a reminder that humanity's last hope was hurtling toward the heart of enemy territory. The Thrix were unlike any enemy humanity had ever faced, ancient, ruthless, and with a thirst for galactic domination that stretched back eons. Their new weapon was a game-changer, one capable of erasing entire planets in the blink of an eye, and the Galactic Council had no choice but to place its trust in the hands of the silent Vanguard. The Vanguard wasn't just a military unit. It was a legend in the making. Composed of the best humanity had to offer, this elite division had been trained for one purpose: to fight in silence. No speeches, no fanfare. Their actions spoke louder than words ever could. The galaxy knew their name not because of media coverage or speeches, but because of their success: strategic, ruthless, and precise. Captain, a voice broke through his thoughts. Lieutenant Maya Rios, the tactical officer, stepped into the room, her face as calm as always. She was the only one on the ship who could read Voss's moods, having served with him through countless missions. We're entering Thrix space. ETA to Vanthal Prime is 30 minutes. Voss turned to her, nodding. His hand briefly touched the worn patch on his sleeve, the insignia of the Vanguard. Before his eyes locked with hers, Maya could see the tension beneath his stoic demeanor. This mission was unlike any other. The Thrix had already decimated 2 entire human colonies, and if they weren't stopped now, they would lay waste to the entire sector. "We're ready," he said, his voice low, carrying the weight of 1,000 battles. "Our orders are simple. Get in, disable their superweapon, and get out. No heroics. No speeches. We hit hard, and we vanish before they know what hit them." Maya nodded, but her expression was tinged with something more. "And if we don't make it out in time?" Voss's lips tightened, and for a moment, his mind raced. There was no if in his vocabulary. In his experience, failure was not an option. The lives of millions depended on this mission, and he would see it through to the end, no matter the cost. "If we don't make it out in time, we do what we've always done," he said, his voice steady. "We finish the job, and we do it quietly." The doors to the command center slid open, and the rest of the Vanguard's elite team filed in, their faces as impassive as their captains. Sergeant Elias Brody, the heavy weapons expert, leaned against the bulkhead, adjusting his weapon as if it were second nature. Corporal Alia Tran, the demolition specialist, tapped her fingers against the table, eyes narrowed with focus. Every member of the team had been handpicked for their expertise and their unflinching resolve. They were not soldiers. They were ghosts. "We'll land in the northern quadrant," Voss said, his gaze sweeping over the room. "We'll use the terrain to our advantage, and when the time comes, we strike. Fast, silent." The team didn't speak. They never did. They simply nodded in acknowledgement, their shared understanding passing between them like an unspoken pact. They were ready. As the ship broke through the planet's atmosphere, Voss took one last glance at the stars. The Vanguard was humanity's final hope, and this mission would either shatter the galaxy's darkest hour or usher in a new era of resistance. Without another word, he turned and walked toward the airlock. The Vanguard followed him, moving as one, silent, unyielding, and unstoppable. The Vanguard hovered just above the jagged landscape of Vanthal Prime, the planet's surface scorched from previous battles. The once thriving world now lay in ruins, a testament to the brutal efficiency of the Thrix invaders. The air was thick with dust, the remnants of destroyed cities, and the stench of death. Through the tactical comms, Captain Voss could hear the drone of enemy patrols moving through the ruins below. It was time to move. "Ready to deploy, Captain." Lieutenant Rios's voice came through his earpiece, calm and collected. "Coordinates are set. We're clear for extraction once the target is down." Voss checked the readout on his wrist pad, confirming the mission objectives. The Thrix superweapon, codename Nightfall, was housed within a heavily fortified research facility deep in the northern continent. It had to be destroyed. No one could know what the weapon was capable of, not after the destruction of 2 human colonies. The Vanguard strike would be swift and silent, or there would be no second chances. With a nod to his team, Voss gave the order. Deploy. In a seamless motion, the airlock doors slid open, and the team of 6 dropped into the cold, desolate world below, their boots hitting the cracked earth in a soft thud. The operation was set to be a textbook insertion, quick, precise, and undetected. But something was wrong. "We've got movement," said Alia Tran, her voice steady despite the sudden tension. She was crouched, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon through the scope of her modified pulse rifle. Enemy patrol, 2 clicks to the east. Voss's brow furrowed. He had anticipated enemy presence, but not this soon. "Stay low. Stay silent. We don't engage unless we have no choice." The team melted into the shadows, disappearing into the terrain with the ease of ghosts. Every step was calculated, each member of the Vanguard a silent predator in the wilderness. They moved like a single entity, fast, efficient, and relentless. But as they neared the facility, a sinking feeling settled in Voss's gut. Something wasn't right. The Thrix were too quiet, too controlled. The facility itself was eerily silent, the air unnaturally still. "Captain," Brody's voice crackled in Voss's ear, "this isn't just a research base. The infrastructure here is too advanced, too well protected. This is a military stronghold." Voss's eyes narrowed. "They're hiding something. Keep your weapons ready." The closer they got, the more Voss felt the hair on the back of his neck rise. The Thrix were always prepared for the worst, but the lack of resistance here seemed deliberate. It was as if they wanted the Vanguard to come. It wasn't just the superweapon they were guarding. It was something more. Voss could feel the weight of it. Suddenly, a loud crash echoed in the distance, a massive explosion, followed by a burst of light that illuminated the ruins. "What the hell?" Brody muttered, his voice filled with alarm. Voss's heart raced. It wasn't just an explosion. It was a message. The Vanguard had been expected. Their every move had been calculated. "Captain," Maya's voice broke through the tension. "I just intercepted a transmission. The Thrix are deploying a special unit, human operatives. They'd been tracking us since we entered the atmosphere." Voss's eyes widened. The Vanguard had assumed that the Thrix were using their traditional forces, but human traitors, mercenaries who had sold out to the Thrix, had been embedded in their operations. This was no longer a simple infiltration mission. "Change of plans," Voss said, his voice low, calm. "We move now. No more silence." The Vanguard moved swiftly through the ruins, their path marked by precise steps and unspoken coordination. Every corner, every shadow held the potential for danger, but the threat wasn't just from the Thrix anymore. Now, it was from the humans who had betrayed them. Voss's mind raced as he processed the new information. The presence of human operatives working for the Thrix was a nightmare scenario, one they weren't prepared for. "Captain, we're moving into the first checkpoint." Maya Rios's voice broke through his thoughts. "The facility is ahead. The outer defenses are down, but we don't know what's waiting inside." Voss didn't respond immediately. His mind was preoccupied with the implications of the human betrayal. The Vanguard had trained for every conceivable scenario, but this was something different. It was as though the Thrix knew they were coming, and that meant they were playing a different game now. The team came to a stop at the edge of a massive concrete wall, its surface pitted with blast marks. The facility loomed before them like a monolith, its once pristine exterior now scarred by years of warfare. Voss raised a hand, signaling for them to take cover. His eyes flicked to the tactical map on his wrist, checking the layout of the facility. "We move in quietly," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "We don't engage unless it's necessary. Alia, you're with me. Brody, Tren, take the rear." Elias, keep an eye on the perimeter. The team nodded, splitting into their designated positions with fluid precision. Alia stepped forward beside Voss, her pulse rifle held at the ready. Her eyes were sharp, her every movement calculated as she scanned the area. Voss couldn't help but appreciate the calm efficiency of his team. Each one of them was a master of their craft, trained for this moment. They reached the facility's entrance undetected, the heavy metal doors sliding open silently at Alia's touch. Inside, the air was thick with the stench of ozone and something far more sinister, an overwhelming sense of dread. The Vanguard entered, weapons at the ready, moving with purpose through the cold, sterile hallways. There was no sign of the Thrix soldiers, no alarms blaring. Nothing to indicate they were in immediate danger. It felt wrong. As they moved deeper into the heart of the facility, Voss's unease grew. The silence was deafening, too perfect. He could feel the eyes of unseen enemies tracking their every move. They were walking into a trap. There was no other explanation. Suddenly, a voice echoed through the facility's comm system, chilling and metallic, sending a wave of dread through the team. "Captain Voss," the voice said, its tone flat and emotionless. "I must say, I expected more from humanity's finest, but I suppose I should thank you for making this easy." Voss froze. His eyes widened as the words sank in. The voice wasn't just a Thrix commander. It was human. The mercenaries had been working with the Thrix from the start, and now they were toying with them. "Who are you?" Voss demanded, his voice steady despite the tension rising within him. The voice chuckled, a cold, cruel sound. "I'm the one who has been waiting for you. And now, I think it's time for you to meet the true power of the Thrix." Before Voss could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway. The Vanguard had walked straight into the heart of the trap. From the shadows, figures emerged, humans, but not the soldiers they were used to. These were not ordinary mercenaries. These were elite operatives, heavily armed and trained to hunt down humanity's best. Voss's hand tightened around his weapon, and he signaled for his team to take cover. The stakes had just been raised. The Vanguard was facing an enemy they could not ignore, an enemy that had infiltrated their ranks and turned the fight against them. "We're not leaving without the mission completed," Voss muttered, his voice a low growl. "Get ready for a fight." The Vanguard would have to adapt, survive, and overcome. But Voss knew this. If they were going to make it out alive, they would have to rely on every ounce of their training, their unity, and their silence. The silence that followed the mercenaries' taunting words was thick and suffocating. The Vanguard was trapped. Voss's heart pounded in his chest as he signaled his team to hold position. They were outnumbered, and the mercenaries' weapons were far more advanced than anything the Vanguard had encountered before. But they couldn't show weakness, not now. Not when the fate of humanity rested on their shoulders. The mercenaries, clad in dark combat armor that blended seamlessly into the shadows, moved with a predatory grace. There were 5 of them, each one armed with cutting-edge energy weapons, their eyes locked onto the Vanguard with an unnerving intensity. Voss's mind raced. There was no way they could take them head-on, not without risking everything. They had to outsmart them, outmaneuver them. They had trained for moments like this, where brute force wouldn't be enough. It was time to rely on the silent tactics that had made the Vanguard legends in the first place. He signaled to Alia, who nodded and dropped to a crouch, her pulse rifle raised, but aimed at the floor. Voss took a deep breath and turned his attention to the approaching enemy. The hallway ahead was narrow, perfect for an ambush. But the mercenaries had already anticipated this, he could tell. They weren't rushing in. They were calculating, waiting for the Vanguard to make their move. "We need to create a distraction," Voss muttered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. Maya's voice cut through the tension, sharp and precise. "I've got a grenade lock. I can cause a diversion up ahead and make them move into our blind spots. But it's going to give us one shot. If we miss it, we're dead." Voss's eyes flicked to the readout on his wrist. The distance to the mercenaries was too close for comfort, and there was nowhere to run. The mission, destroying the Thrix's weapon and preventing the mercenaries from reinforcing their forces, was more important than any of their lives. "Do it," Voss ordered, his voice firm. Maya didn't hesitate. With swift precision, she deployed the small, high-tech grenade. The device hummed faintly before releasing a burst of blinding light and a concussive wave of force. The shockwave rattled the air, knocking the mercenaries off balance. The Vanguard sprang into action at once, like a well-oiled machine. Aelia fired first, her shot ringing out with deadly accuracy, striking one of the mercenaries in the shoulder. The enemy soldier grunted in pain, but managed to return fire, a streak of red energy slicing through the air, just inches from Voss's head. Brody and Tran were already on the move, flanking the mercenaries from either side. Their weapons roared to life as they unleashed a storm of suppressive fire. For a split second, everything was chaos. The Vanguard's training took over. They didn't hesitate. They moved with ruthless efficiency, every shot, every move calculated. The mercenaries were quick, but they weren't prepared for the ferocity of the Vanguard's counterattack. But the mercenaries weren't just skilled, they were driven by something more. Voss could see it in their eyes. They fought like they had nothing left to lose, like they were the hunters, and the Vanguard were the prey. Suddenly, one of the mercenaries, a towering figure with a scared face and an unnerving calmness, broke off from the group. He rushed toward Maya, the last remaining Vanguard member in the open, who had just reloaded her weapon. Voss's heart stopped as he saw the threat, but it was too late. "Maya!" Voss shouted, his voice a mix of anger and urgency. Without missing a beat, Aelia lunged forward, leaping in front of Maya. She brought her rifle up just in time to meet the mercenary's strike. The force of the blow sent Aelia crashing to the ground, but she didn't stop. She rolled, firing off another shot, this time hitting the mercenary square in the chest. The enemy fell with a heavy thud, but the danger was far from over. Voss knew the real test had only just begun. As the smoke cleared and the sounds of battle died down, the remaining mercenaries regrouped, their weapons aimed at the Vanguard with lethal precision. "Fall back," Voss ordered, raising his own weapon to cover his team. "We need to get to the core. Now." There was no time to waste. The team was exhausted, wounded, and cornered, but they were still humanity's last hope. They would finish this, or they would die trying. The Vanguard retreated quickly, their movements sharp and precise, but every second they spent in the open felt like a lifetime. The blast from Maya's grenade had given them a brief advantage, but it was already slipping away. They had to move deeper into the facility to reach their objective, the core, where the Thrix's doomsday weapon was being housed. The sound of boots hitting the concrete echoed behind them as they made their way down narrow hallways, their backs to the walls, eyes scanning every corner. Voss knew they couldn't afford another firefight. Their ammo was running low, and they were losing precious time. They had no choice but to press on. The core was their only chance. Aelia was already several steps ahead, her pace unwavering as she cleared each corner with practiced efficiency. Her face was bruised from her earlier fight with the mercenary, but her resolve hadn't wavered. She was the backbone of the Vanguard, a quiet storm, focused and unyielding. Behind them, Brody and Tran kept their eyes on the rear, constantly scanning for any sign of pursuit. The hallways were dead quiet, save for the distant hum of the facility's power systems. The Thrix had designed the place to be a fortress, and it was proving to be just that. Voss's jaw clenched as the weight of their situation pressed down on him. "Maya," Voss said, his voice low, "I need you to check the map again. We're getting close, but I don't want any surprises." Maya nodded and tapped her wrist-mounted display. Her fingers flew across the screen as she navigated the facility's schematics. The blueprints had been a lifesaver, but even with all their technology, there was no predicting what they might face next. "It's just ahead," Maya confirmed. The core is in a reinforced chamber on the lower level, but it's heavily secured. We'll have to disable the defenses before we can access it. Voss's eyes narrowed. He'd known the mission wouldn't be easy, but they were running out of options. The Thrix had made sure to fortify every inch of the facility. The core would be nearly impossible to breach without triggering a full-scale lockdown. And if that happened, they would never make it out alive. Tran, get on the panel, Voss ordered. Disable the security systems. We'll hold them off. Tran nodded, his face set in determination. The young soldier had a gift for hacking and had already proved invaluable in previous missions. Voss had complete trust in him, but even Tran's skills had their limits. The time it would take to hack into the core's security systems would be a risk, but there was no alternative. If they didn't disable the defenses, the Vanguard wouldn't even make it through the door. As Tran worked furiously on the control panel, the rest of the team gathered around, setting up a perimeter. The tension in the air was palpable as they waited for the inevitable. They could hear the faint sound of footsteps echoing down the hall, mercenaries closing in, most likely tracking their every movement. "Stay focused," Voss said quietly, locking eyes with each of his team members. "This is it. We finish this, or we die trying." Alia's gaze flicked toward the door behind them, scanning for any sign of movement. She gripped her rifle tighter, the muscles in her arms tense. Brody shifted his weight, ready to spring into action, while Maya kept her eyes on the map, monitoring their progress. Voss's fingers hovered over the trigger, his senses sharp. Every noise, every shift of air was amplified in the silence. The enemy was out there, but they weren't ready yet. Not while they were still alive. Finally, Tran looked up, sweat dripping down his face as he punched in the last command. "It's done. The security's down." Voss didn't hesitate. He gave the signal, and the Vanguard moved forward as one. The door to the core chamber loomed ahead, its massive metal surface cold and unyielding. Behind them, the sound of footsteps grew louder, mercenaries on the hunt. There was no turning back now. With a single motion, Voss slammed his shoulder into the door, forcing it open. The core chamber was vast, its walls lined with humming energy conduits and glistening control panels. At the far end of the room, the Thrix's weapons sat in the center, a massive, ominous device, pulsing with raw power. But they were not alone. As the Vanguard stepped inside, several figures stepped out from the shadows. More mercenaries, their weapons aimed directly at the team. The leader, the same scared face that had taunted them earlier, grinned maliciously. "You're too late," the mercenary leader said, his voice dripping with satisfaction. "This time, humanity falls." Voss's eyes hardened. Not today. The Vanguard was ready. The final confrontation had begun. The room was filled with tension, the air thick with the weight of what was to come. Voss's fingers tightened around his rifle as the mercenary leader's mocking smile widened, his hand resting on the hilt of a sleek energy blade. His team stood poised for the inevitable. This was the moment they'd been training for, the reason they'd silently fought for so long. The Vanguard had no choice but to take this final stand. The core chamber was vast, a towering monument to the Thrix's cruel ingenuity. A few hundred feet ahead, the massive weapon pulsed with a dangerous energy that threatened to tear through the very fabric of space itself. It was the galaxy's last line of defense against Earth's resistance. If it activated, humanity's final hope would vanish in an instant. Voss could feel the weight of the situation in every muscle. He had no room for mistakes now. "Alia, Brody, take the high ground," he ordered, his voice calm but firm. "Maya, Tran, flank left. I'll take the right." The team moved with practiced precision. The battlefield had shifted again, and they were the only ones who could prevent total annihilation. As they split into position, Voss's eyes locked on the mercenary leader. A chilling silence fell over the chamber, only the hum of the weapon and the sound of boots on the cold floor breaking it. "I'm impressed," the mercenary leader said, his voice low. You actually made it this far. But this is where your story ends, Captain Voss. You and your team can't stop what's already begun. Voss's lips tightened. We'll see about that. Without warning, the mercenary leader raised his hand, signaling his team to advance. The battle erupted with deafening force. Aelia was the first to fire, her rifle spitting a burst of precise shots at the mercenaries on the left. She moved fluidly, dodging incoming fire as she took up a defensive position behind a support beam. Brody followed suit, laying down suppressive fire, his shots slicing through the air with brutal accuracy. The enemy mercenaries returned fire, their energy weapons lighting up the room, but the Vanguard were fast, adapting to the chaos with every step. Meanwhile, Voss sprinted to the right side of the chamber, using the pillars for cover as he approached the mercenary leader. The man's eyes followed him, calculating. It was clear that the mercenary leader was waiting for the perfect moment to strike, but Voss wouldn't give him that opportunity. He was in the zone now, every move a beat in a deadly symphony. Voss reached the leader's position faster than the mercenary expected. A violent exchange of blows erupted between them. The leader wielded his energy blade with deadly finesse, but Voss countered with the precision of a seasoned soldier. They clashed in a series of brutal strikes, their weapons meeting with an electric hiss as sparks flew. You think you can stop me? The mercenary leader snarled, his face twisting with anger. Voss only grunted in response, deflecting a downward strike and stepping in close to deliver a crushing elbow to the man's ribs. The mercenary leader staggered but recovered quickly, spinning his blade toward Voss's throat. Before he could land the strike, Voss ducked low and swept the leader's legs from under him. The mercenary leader crashed to the ground with a grunt, and before he could recover, Voss was on top of him. With a swift motion, he knocked the energy blade from the man's hand, disarming him. He drew his sidearm and aimed it at the leader's head. End of the line, Voss said coldly, his finger on the trigger. But the mercenary leader only smiled, his teeth flashing with malice. You've won nothing yet. That weapon is already primed. Voss's heart skipped a beat. He turned toward the core, his eyes widening in realization. The countdown had already begun. The weapon was seconds away from activation. No, Voss shouted, his voice desperate. In that instant, a distant sound filled the room, the unmistakable hiss of a charging weapon. Aelia's voice crackled over the comms. Voss, the core's energy levels are rising too fast. We need to shut it down. Now. Voss glanced at the console near the core. Sparks flew from it as the system overloaded, and the air buzzed with an unnatural energy. They had only moments to stop it, but they couldn't do it alone. Maya, Tran, get to the console, Voss ordered. I'll hold them off. Maya and Tran were already moving, their bodies low as they sprinted toward the central control panel. The mercenaries, however, weren't about to let them get any closer. Two of them opened fire, their shots aimed at the team's only chance to stop the countdown. Voss gritted his teeth. It was do or die. Aelia. Now. Aelia emerged from her cover, her rifle blasting a concentrated pulse at the mercenaries blocking the path. The shots were precise, knocking two of them back, buying Maya and Tran the precious seconds they needed. Maya dove for the console, her hands flying across the keys. The countdown was getting closer. Hold them off, Maya shouted, her voice steady but filled with urgency. Voss and Aelia exchanged a determined look. They knew what needed to be done. This was their last chance. The seconds felt like hours as Voss watched Maya's hands fly over the console, her face etched with concentration. The countdown to disaster was mere moments away. The room was a battlefield now, chaos reigning in every corner. Voss's heart pounded, every breath strained, as he kept his eyes on the mercenaries closing in. They couldn't allow this weapon to fire. Not now, not ever. Aelia had taken a tactical position at the far side of the room. Picking off the mercenaries who had regrouped, her rifles fire a constant pulse of deadly accuracy. Each shot struck with surgical precision, taking out a mercenary with unflinching calm. Yet even as she cut down enemy after enemy, there were more coming, more reinforcements. The odds were rapidly stacking against them. Maya, Voss barked, desperation creeping into his voice. How much longer? She didn't look up from the console, but her hands moved faster now, every keystroke a race against time. I'm in, but the system's corrupted. It's fighting me. I need just a few more seconds. Seconds they didn't have. A loud crash echoed from the far side of the room. The mercenary leader, now disarmed but not defeated, was back on his feet. He was furious, eyes burning with hatred. Voss's pulse quickened. The leader was coming for him. Voss. Alia's voice rang out through the comms. Behind you. Voss whirled just in time to see the mercenary leader lunge at him, his fist rocketing toward Voss's face. The impact was brutal, knocking Voss backward and sending him sprawling to the floor. His helmet cracked against the cold metal, the world spinning around him. He struggled to regain his bearings, but the leader was relentless. Before Voss could stand, a boot slammed into his side, pinning him against the ground. The mercenary leader loomed over him, his chest heaving with rage, his hand grabbing for the knife at his belt. You're pathetic, the leader growled. This is where it ends. Voss's vision blurred, but he forced himself to focus. He couldn't let the enemy win, not when they were this close. He reached up, grabbing a piece of debris from the floor, a sharp fragment of metal. With a grunt, he drove it into the leader's leg, catching him by surprise. The leader staggered back, his grip loosening just long enough for Voss to roll away and regain his footing. You're not killing anyone today, Voss spat, shaking off the pain. Alia's voice came through his earpiece again, urgent. Voss, the core is about to breach. Get over here. Voss looked over at the console. Maya was struggling, her fingers flying over the interface, but the system was corrupt. Glitches flashing across the screen as the countdown continued its relentless march forward. Voss's eyes narrowed as he spotted the mercenary leader, recovering and reaching for his weapon once more. He couldn't let that happen. Not now. Alia, he shouted. Cover me. Before Alia could respond, Voss was already sprinting toward the console. He darted past the wreckage, using whatever cover he could find. Bullets and energy blasts whizzed by him, but he didn't flinch. Every step was one closer to stopping the weapon. He slid into position beside Maya, who was still trying to hack into the system. Her face was grim with frustration, her jaw clenched tight. I can't override the final lock, she said, voice strained. The Thrix built this thing with a failsafe. We need to reset the system from the core itself. Voss's eyes scanned the room. The core's power center loomed ahead, crackling with raw energy as it spun into life. Time was running out. Voss's gaze locked on the mercenary leader, who was already charging toward them. There was no time to waste. Maya, get to that core, Voss ordered. I'll buy you the time. The words were barely out of his mouth before he was on the move again, bolting toward the mercenary leader, who had raised his weapon, a plasma blade, gleaming and deadly. He didn't hesitate. Voss dove for the leader, slamming into him with everything he had. The two men collided with a resounding crash, the mercenary's plasma blade swinging wide. Voss was quick, too quick. He managed to land a solid blow to the leader's ribs, sending him crashing against a nearby pillar. The leader snarled in pain, but he recovered swiftly, his blade crackling with energy. You won't stop this, the mercenary leader growled. Your people are finished. Voss's eyes flared with defiance. Not while I'm standing. Just as the leader lunged again, Voss kicked his legs out from under him, sending the mercenary sprawling. In the same motion, Voss ripped the plasma blade from his hand, sending it skidding across the floor. He didn't have time to celebrate the victory. Maya was still at the console, and the countdown was still ticking. She couldn't stop it without getting to the core. Voss's gaze flicked to the control panel. He had no choice now. He had to get to the heart of the weapon, before the Thrix used it to destroy everything they'd fought for. The air in the chamber crackled with energy, the hum of the weapon's core building to a deafening crescendo. Time was running out. Every heartbeat seemed to echo like a drumbeat in the silence between the chaos. Voss's hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the moment. He had no choice but to keep fighting. With the mercenary leader down but not out, Voss knew the time for hesitation had passed. The countdown on the weapon's display flickered. Seconds left. And still, Maya was struggling with the console, unable to gain access to the core's systems. Voss's eyes locked onto the heart of the machine. He knew that the only way to stop it was to reach the core itself. Without thinking, he ran toward the central platform, dodging fire from the remaining mercenaries who were frantically trying to regroup. His legs burned with exhaustion, but he pushed through it. There was no time to falter now. Behind him, Aelia continued to lay down cover fire, her rifle's steady bursts cutting through the remaining mercenaries with unerring precision. Brody and Tran joined her, their weapons lighting up the space with calculated fire. They were determined, every soldier doing their part to hold the line. But Voss couldn't afford to waste a second on anything else. The core had to be shut down, or it would all be over. Voss reached the base of the core, where the machine pulsed with raw, deadly energy. The glow was blinding, and the heat was intense, but Voss didn't flinch. He climbed onto the platform, and in a single motion, ripped open the access panel that controlled the power flow. The system was locked tight, the fail-safes blinking red in warning. He could feel the tremors of the weapon's activation deep within his bones. The Thrix had engineered it to be unbreakable, but humanity had never backed down from a challenge. Voss worked quickly, pulling at wires and connectors, his hands moving with practiced speed. Sweat stung his eyes, but he didn't stop. Every second mattered. Maya's voice crackled over the comms, urgent but steady. "I'm almost there. Just keep it together, Voss." He nodded, even though he knew she couldn't see him. "I'm right here." A sharp clang echoed as the door to the control room crashed open. The remaining mercenaries were closing in, but Voss had no time to face them now. He slammed his fist down on a series of switches, forcing the system to reset. The core shuddered violently, the power pulsing out of control. Sparks flew as the machines fought back, but Voss refused to yield. "Maya," he shouted again, his voice hoarse from the strain. The countdown continued, the seconds slipping away like sand through his fingers. And then, just as the final moments seemed to tick down into oblivion, a loud click sounded, and the console screen in front of Voss turned green. "It's done." Maya's voice rang through his earpiece. "The system is reset. The countdown has stopped." Voss exhaled in a slow, ragged breath, his body trembling with a mix of relief and exhaustion. The weapon, the looming threat that had hung over them for so long, was powerless now. He could hardly believe it. But the battle wasn't over yet. The mercenaries had regrouped, and they were coming at them fast, more determined than ever to finish the job. Voss's fingers tightened around his rifle as he stood tall on the platform. They had won the battle, but they hadn't won the war. "Voss." Aelia's voice came again, crackling with urgency. "They're swarming from all sides. We can't hold them off much longer." Voss didn't hesitate. He turned to face his team, rallying them with a determined look. "We've fought too long to let it end now. Stay with me." He leaped back into the fray, his team right behind him. The battle that followed was brutal, mercenaries closing in from every direction, but the Vanguard fought like they always had, without hesitation, without mercy. Aelia, Brody, and Tran fought as if every strike was their last, their weapons a blur of motion. Maya, still behind the control panel, provided support, locking down enemy access points and providing critical intel through their comms. The mercenaries were relentless, but the Vanguard were something more, something the enemy could never fully understand. Their strength wasn't just in their weapons, but in their unshakable resolve, their unwavering belief in each other, and in humanity's ability to rise above every challenge. With each passing minute, the tide began to turn. The mercenaries faltered. Slowly but surely, they retreated, unwilling to face the wrath of the Vanguard any longer. Finally, as the last of the enemies fell, Voss looked around the room. His team was battered, bruised, but standing tall. And the weapon, the one thing that could have ended it all, was nothing more than a silent, lifeless husk. They had done it. They had saved everything. For a moment, there was nothing but silence, a silence born of hard-earned victory. Voss's voice broke through it, steady and sure. "It's over," he said. "Humanity stands." The team shared a look, knowing that this battle, though won, was only the beginning. The galaxy was vast, and many challenges still lay ahead. But for now, they had accomplished the impossible, and that would carry them through whatever came next. Together, the Vanguard had proven that the heroes who speak through action could never be silenced.